Hey everyone, welcome to September's edition of Jira for Scrum Masters. We are going to be covering some very exciting things today, and we are going to be just having a lot of fun talking about how to use Jira as a Scrum Master. I'm very excited here to get started with you all, and so we're just going to give it a minute here for people to join. But as people are joining, why don't you let me know where you're tuning in from, and I'm sure we're going to have a merry old time just learning about the ins and outs of Jira, specifically how Scrum Masters can take advantage of Jira to really get really efficient with the tool, right? Because there's a lot of different ways to use Jira, and the tool is just a tool, but there's a way, there's a technique, there's a way to really use the tool as efficiently as possible. And today we're going to be covering that. So, welcome everybody that's tuning in. This is Jira for Scrum Masters. I'm going to get the slides up here in a second, but while I'm doing that, why don't you let me know where you're tuning in from? Let me know how many years of experience you've been using Jira. Just trying to get a feel for where everybody's at, their skill level, comfort level, and we'll just jump into it. So let's go into the slideshow here. Real quick, we'll kick things off with Jira for Scrum Masters. This is our September cohort. Probably going to be the last time we do it. We're probably going to be switching up topics here starting in October for the last quarter of the year. So make sure you ask all your questions here. Ask away, because this is really for you. Let's make this as interactive as possible. So if you're a Scrum Master in the chat, why don't you raise your hand real quick and maybe just let me know with the comment of I'm a Scrum Master, and we'll get that conversation going from there. So what are we going to be learning today? As I said, in case you missed it here at the very beginning, Jira is just a tool at the end of the day, right? But how you use that tool makes all the difference in the world. So I'm going to be walking you through the techniques, the tips, and the tricks that I have built over the years as a Scrum Master myself to really get the most bang for your buck, right? To really get the most efficiencies out of Jira and to make you truly a phenomenal Scrum Master. So some of the things we're going to be covering today is road mapping. We're going to kick things off with roadmaps, talk about releases, epics, stories, and tasks. And then we're going to get into some very explicit, very detailed, very focused um, content of backlog refinement, planning a sprint, executing your daily scrums, and then completing your sprint. So we're going to get into the actual details of how do we use Jira as a Scrum Master? Because like I mentioned over and over, right? Jira is just Jira, and unless you know how to wield this tool, you might not be as effective. So before we get too far, though, just a couple of announcements here. So my name's Alex. I have a master's in systems engineering and a bachelor's in computer engineering. I have an ACP 520, and I'm currently, in case you missed it just a couple of hours ago, I have started my journey into learning the ACP 120, or studying and training and preparing for the ACP 120. So if you're interested in that, check out the Jira Life here. If you haven't subscribed to the Jira Life, highly recommend you subscribe to the Jira Life. But make sure you check out the Jira Life, the videos. I will have a playlist. It's just so fresh that I haven't had a chance to get the playlist going. But we will have a playlist from for ACP 120 that you can check out there. So if you're new, or if you're planning on taking the ACP 120, maybe at Barcelona, or maybe just at another time, make sure you follow along that ACP 120 so you learn about that. Other than that, I do have a link here. If you can scan that QR code, we have another YouTube channel called Tech Tutorials. That's the main channel. That's where I have over 700 videos, I think, now at this point, on how to use Jira. Lots of videos there. And so we have the Jira Life here. We have Tech over there. We have a book. We have paid courses. We have free courses. We have all kinds of different options for you. So make sure you scan that QR code there to just learn and kind of get familiar with all the different offerings that are available for you, because you're not alone on this journey, and there's lots and lots of resources for you. So that's what that QR code is there. So let's start off. All right, so we're going to jump into Jira. The slides are usually not made available because I don't really use the slides. The slides are going to be here to kind of keep me honest, keep me on track. I do tend to go on tangents, so feel free to ask questions throughout the stream here and add derailments, right? I will usually come back. I have a couple of gaps here, little stop signs in between the presentation and the material today. and so we can take a look at your questions. So if you have any questions, doubts, concerns, you're just not sure about something, take advantage of the fact that this is a free live stream. You are here with an expert, and just pause me, and so we can address your questions. So with that said, we're gonna just exit on out of here, and we're gonna jump into Jira. And I like to kick things off with road mapping. I like to talk about road mapping because road mapping is very important. As a Scrum Master, you don't get to define the roadmap, but there's a big but here. As a Scrum Master, you get to leverage the insight of a roadmap to help you be a much more effective Scrum Master. And the reason that is because the roadmap basically sets the vision, right? The roadmap is done by like your product managers, your product owners, where they basically go and figure out, hey, what is it that we want to do? What is it that we want to deliver? What do we want to accomplish? Right? What's the goals here? What are these milestones look like? And what are the dates that are important and critical for a given project, right? And so this roadmap here is called the timeline. It used to be called the roadmaps. Atlassian has so many different names for all the same things, right? But this timeline here / your roadmap, it's very, very important, okay? Because as a Scrum Master, you can come in here, and there's a couple of things, a couple of tips that I want you to take away, right? Maybe you're not the person doing these changes, but I want you to have that fundamental understanding so that maybe you could then talk with your product manager. You can talk with a variety of people, right? Whoever does maintain your roadmap, so that they can make your life a little bit easier and hopefully increase the probability of success for you and your team. So first off, again, if you're not using this, this is the basic timeline built into Jira. Every single Jira Scrum and Kanban project has this timeline. And this timeline is great. It's basic, but let me show you a couple of things that are pretty powerful here. Number one, you have the ability to basically create and define epics. Now, this is pretty important because epics is really like the highest tier, at least if you're on the standard and free versions of Jira, it's the highest tier that you can start defining things, okay? And so when you're looking at a project or a big deliverable, and you got to start breaking it down into like capabilities, functionality, maybe even features, right? The epic is where it's at. Again, you as a Scrum Master, you don't necessarily create these epics, right? But you leverage, right? You leverage the stories that are nested within these epics to put a plan together with your team. And so knowing the order of operations, knowing which epics should be completed first, and in what order they need to be completed in, will heavily influence how we plan our sprints downstream. So this is why I'm starting off here, because this is really the highest point where as we look at our timeline, we have a list of epics, right? Now, in case you didn't know, this timeline is rankable. And what that means is very similar to your backlog, as we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. You can actually grab items from your timeline here and move them up. And so as you move things up and down, we can set the level of importance there. Second, all of these items can have dates on them, right? So if we wanted to define a date for a particular epic, right, the start and the end date or the due date of that epic, again, something you probably don't have to worry about, but knowing that due date is very critical, right? Knowing when things are due, when the business is expecting things to be finished by, will heavily help you understand which stories, right? So if I expand these epics, it'll help you understand which stories need to be created or worked on in the right order so that you're delivering, your teams are delivering the right work at the right time, right? Because otherwise, if you don't have a roadmap, if you don't have some sort of a plan, then it's really hard to plan your sprints because you're just shooting in the dark, right? You're just randomly taking things out of your backlog, which doesn't really help to get traction or make progress on any specific deliverable. But when you're looking at it from a roadmap perspective, then things start to align and your planets start to align, your stars start to align, and the work of a Scrum Master becomes a lot more trivial than guesswork, right? Because we don't want to be guessing at what needs to be worked on. So that's where these epics and these dates really, really make a difference. So adding dates is super simple, right? You can just move things around. You can expand the dates, right? If there's no date on a particular epic, you can just simply drag and drop like that. And now all of a sudden you have some dates, right? So these are your start and end dates. Again, probably something you're not going to be creating, but very, very helpful, very, very beneficial if you have someone on your team setting this vision for you and your team, as we're going to learn about it more in a second. One last thing, and this is going to kind of overflow into the next topic, and that is you'll notice that we have these vertical red lines and blue lines, right? And so part of the timeline of functionality that you get is that you'll notice that you have your sprints up here, and you'll notice you have releases. Now, sprints you're probably familiar with if you've ever done any Scrum training, but releases you might not be as familiar. But think of releases as like milestones or gates or just major junctions where you're expected to deliver something, right? And so these vertical lines are lines in the sand that guide us as Scrum Masters so that we know when that absolute finish line is so that we can plan backwards from there, right? Because it's very easy to go, hey, I have a September Jira Scrum Masters training happening here. I need to work backwards. I need to make sure that whatever items need to happen in preparation for that milestone, they're in place so that we can get things out in a timely manner. Otherwise, you start slipping on dates, right? And nobody wants to slip on dates. So we'll walk through releases just in a second here. But when you do have releases or versions, Jira uses them interchangeably. You'll be able to physically see them on this timeline here. And you can see if your dates, right? So if we were to take this epic and go, oh, this epic needs to be completed by this date. Well, we can see that the end date of that epic is on the left-hand side of the due date of the milestone. So we're good. We're really good standing there. So this is how we can leverage this. Again, you wouldn't be expected to set these dates or know them, but as a Scrum Master, I would be studying these dates so that when we get into the details of like, okay, let's plan a sprint, it can make our lives a lot easier. So that's information here on the timeline, right? So now let's go a little bit deeper, right? And let's go talk about releases. So another function of Jira is called a release or releases. And inside of these releases, you can create versions. Now, I'm going to go and create a new version called October Jira for Scrum Masters, even though this course is probably not going to exist. And we're just going to go set a date. The start date doesn't really matter. We'll set October 1st, but the end date is critical. The end date is what gives you that vertical line. So let's just say October 11th. We'll hit save, and now all of a sudden we have a version. Now, a couple of disclaimers. If you've never used versions, a couple of things you got to know. Number one, this is not available in team managed projects. So if you're in a team managed project, sorry, you should have picked better, right? This is a company managed functionality and one that's one of my favorite functionalities of Jira. So make sure you're in a company managed project if you want to be able to do these milestones and vertical lines in the sand. Number two, these items, these versions that we're creating can only be created by a project administrator. So that means that if you're looking at Jira, you should be able to see the words project settings down here. If you don't, that means you don't have the right permission in Jira, and some existing project admin or your Jira admin, they should be able to add you with the role of administrator for this project, which will then let you create versions. This is not like a Jira admin thing. This is not a you're gonna add users or change configurations. Project admin, all it does is lets you literally create components and releases so that you can use them in your Jira project. So that's how easily it is. That's how easy it is to create a version. Now, this is where things get scary. So if I go back to my timeline and I open up one of these stories here, in Jira, now that we've created that infrastructure, right now that we have that version, how do we use it? Well, down inside of Jira, there's going to be a field, okay? And that field is usually all the way at the bottom under more fields, and it's called the fixed versions field. And in this field, if you click into here, you will see that the versions that we just saw in the last screen, they're available here, right? And this is critical, right? Because what makes this field kind of cool is that project by project, so every Jira project can have its own defined versions. If you have 2 or 3 projects working on the same release, as long as you call them exactly the same, character by character, all the right caps, all the right spaces, technically they're going to be separate versions, but you can search in JQL for the same one. So if you're kind of using Jira at scale, just food for thought. Otherwise, if you're just kind of zoomed in on just one little project, um, your versions exist only within your project. So as you can see here, we can manipulate which versions show up by adding or removing or releasing versions. And so I'm just going to click that October one. And all that does is it's basically going to put a sticker on the Jira ticket that we're going to use in a minute. And it's going to show us the fixed version. Now, one other element that I like to, let's see, we come back over here. Before we get into epics, one other element that I like to talk about that we haven't talked about before in these trainings is that of a component. So Jira has this concept called a component. Now, when you go to components, Atlassian has been showing you Compass components. This is the true way of using components. But if you're not there yet, if your company's not using Compass, all you got to do is turn that off, and you're going to be defaulted now back to Jira components. And a component is, in my opinion, very, very helpful, right? Because as Scrum Masters, again, our job is kind of like the conductor of an orchestra, right? We got to have the right instrument come in at the right time, at the right note, and knowing and anticipating and like knowing the song is very critical, right? Because we can't just be up there guessing and just pointing fingers at different instruments, right? Like we're harmonizing, we're creating this system where our team is well basically communicated to, and they know what to expect. They know what's do when and how and the who, what, when, where, why, right? And so components is another field that's available in Jira. Again, company managed projects only, unfortunately. If you're in team managed, sorry, you gotta try again and actually pick a company managed project this time. But the components is a field that takes the system, whatever it is you're building, and it allows you to break it down into the system of parts, right? What makes up that deliverable? What makes up that system that we maintain, right? So if you're like a mobile shop, maybe making mobile apps, that might be the different systems of your app, right? Different components, right? Obviously, it's a component, right? And so it lets you break things down. And I love this. I love this field because it helps us prioritize parts of the system that we want to ship first, because you can't boil the ocean. Boiling the ocean is really, really hard. And so by working component by component, we can essentially start working on logically on the right parts at the right time. Now, very similar to the versions, creating a component is a project admin only thing. So you need to be able to see project settings down here. And as soon as you're a project admin, all you got to do is click on create a component. I'm going to put iOS, right? You can give it to a person as a lead, right? The owner, the architect that owns that part. And then I would leave this default assignee as project default. Click on save, and now we have components. And so now when we go back to our stories, right? When we go back to that story we were looking at earlier, we have a field called components that when we click into it, we now see the component. Now, both the fixed version and the component is a multi-select field, which means if I wanted to, we can click on 2 or more values, right? But I'm just going to keep it simple and just do iOS for now. And so you might be asking yourself at this point, Alex, what are you talking about? What does this have to do with Scrum Masters, right? Well, here's the important part, right? I'm giving you like foundations. I'm giving you a framework here that allows you to put data into Jira. Because a lot of the times as Scrum Masters, right, we're like I mentioned, right, our job is to be that conductor of that orchestra. But if you don't know, right, if you don't have data to make good decisions, you're just guessing. And you don't want to be guessing, right? You don't want to be trying to figure out on the fly what's the biggest emergency, what's the biggest fire we got to put out. Because if you do that, you might miss. Or even worse, you might be good at firefighting, but it leads to terrible burnout. And so you don't want to be playing this constant game where you're just like reacting and reacting and reacting to changes. You want to, for the most part, add some facts and data so that your life as a Scrum Master is a little bit less opinionated and a little bit more fact driven. And so that's all I'm helping you do here, right? I'm giving you some of the foundations of Jira that you may not know or appreciate, but really do help you down the stream, which we're going to talk about here in this training, downstream. Um, Look at, right, reference, so that when it comes time to making those decisions as to what goes into my sprint, what gets deferred to the next sprint and stuff like that. It's a lot more fact driven than like somebody yelling, "Hey, I need this done yesterday," right? Because that's not a situation, that's not a culture, that's not an environment we want to be in. We don't want to be in the room where somebody's just yelling, "I need this done, I need this done, I need it done 2 weeks ago. Why isn't it done?" Right? We want to be in control a little bit more, and I'm just giving you those tools. So that's where that fixed version is going to come into play, and that's where that that's where that component is going to come into play. And the third piece that comes into play, again, not something you would control. Maybe you don't even control any of these things either, right? But again, just situational awareness so you can communicate with the people in your team that are in charge so that they can do it for you. Now, the last thing that I'll kind of mention here is you're seeing epics, right? Epics play a critical role. If your company today is only using stories, you're doing yourself a disservice, right? The epics are really powerful in Jira. They're there to help you group work that is similar, right? And if you're taking an agile course before, which I'm sure all US Scrum Masters have, right? You know that epics don't really have a place, right? Epics are seen as just a really big story that needs to be broken down, which is true. But in Jira, those epics just help us organize our work so much more effectively. So one of the things that I want to urge you is to consider working with your product owner to create these epics, to create logical groupings of the work. Because if you remember from the beginning, because your timeline is ranked, your Scrum Master, sorry, your product owner can help influence the order of operations of those epics, right? Because as we go into the second half of this training, you're going to see how all this comes together when we have fixed versions, we have components, we have epics, and we have the rank of the epic, right? We also have the priority field. The priority field is a pretty critical field that we can use to also add yet another layer of complexity to, hey, we have all these items, but out of all these items, these they have to work in this order, right? And so we have a lot of levers, a lot of different data points that we can leverage to help us paint a narrative so that when it comes time to planning our sprints, that sprint planning activity becomes a lot more trivial and a lot less guesswork. So those are the different things that you can leverage inside of Jira to help you again when it comes time to sprint planning. So we'll kind of stop there for a second here. And Michelle has a question of how does priority relate to rank or does it not? So I would say they're similar but not exactly the same, right? At the end of the day, priority and rank just help tell a narrative. And in case you guys are wondering, right? So rank is the order, right? I can move things up and down and put things like this, right? But immediately, what this tells me is that this is number one, this is number two, this is number three, right? But that just gives you order 1, 2, 3. Now, the priority field, and this is going to make a lot more sense when we're in the backlog view, right? But the priority field can help us then say, hey, well, this is 1, 2, 3, but pay more attention to like this, right? Or give more emphasis to another item, right? So you have an order of 1, 2, 3, but you can say, well, these are 1, 2, 3 because they're the most important or the most critical, or they're a blocker or something like that, right? So that priority field helps influence that rank because you might not know the rank immediately, right? You might not know what the rank should be, but when you're creating a ticket or when you're articulating with your team or communicating with your team, that priority might come up in discussion, which it should. And then when you're ranking your stuff, you can look at that priority, which again, it'll make more sense when we look at the backlog view, because the backlog view is going to show you the rank and the priority on the same line, and you'll be able to make those determinations. So hopefully that answers that question, Michelle. All right. So what else do we have? So let's briefly talk about stories, and then we're just going to get into the meat of it, right? So when we are looking at our stories, right? So I'm moving into the backlog view now because that's really where you see your stories. One rookie mistake that I see is that your stories are really, really big, right? And I think if I were to like, right, if I were to just try to guess, why is it that we suck at Scrum Masters, right? Like, why do we fail so much? And I would challenge, right, my opinion. So let me know in the comments if you agree or don't agree with my opinion here, right? But I would attribute to us not being effective Scrum Masters because we're missing data, right? This is why I'm showing you that extra data. And two, because we are we don't have good stories, right? Again, now it's not our job to create the stories. It's not our job as a Scrum Master to create the stories, right? But it is our job to push back, right? And I think a lot of the times when we're not being successful, when we don't have the right tools, it's really easy to put blame on the Scrum Master when things go wrong. But this is why I'm trying to give you all this like auxiliary information that you can leverage as a Scrum Master to really make your job way more trivial and a lot less opinionated, right? And so having well-defined stories that are not epics hidden as a story is something that you should not take lightly, right? Like you should really, really push back when these stories are really big. And the team will help you understand if those stories are really big because the story points that your team estimates, they're going to be big, right? They're going to come at you with some really big numbers. And so whenever you start seeing 8s, 13s, 21s, assuming you're following Fibonacci, those are big, really, really big red flags that you take back to your team. And so I would encourage you to look at the INVEST principle. If you look up INVEST story, there's this thing where stories should be independent, negotiable, valuable, estimatable, small, and testable. So look at each story, right? Before you commit, before you bring them into your sprints, look at each story and make sure that they follow that, right? Because if they're really, really big, you're going to be set up for failure, right? And you're going to fail as a Scrum Master, and you're going to think that you're just not good at your job, but really it was the work that was given to you. So really, really push back here and really try to drive that change, that cultural change, and push your teams back, and really just zoom in on those stories, right? Because they should be as small as possible. They should be small. They should fit within the iteration, right? A lot of teams just like to put things into Jira and not consider the iteration or the sprint. And so make sure that they're that small. So that's kind of what we'll do there. And then very briefly, due dates. Stories shouldn't have due dates. Stories, in my opinion, if you're following Scrum or Agile a little bit, right? The due date of the story is the due date of the sprint. It's when the sprint ends, right? So give your team autonomy. Don't micromanage them, right? Because a lot of teams they try to micromanage it, it just makes things worse. So try to give your teams that autonomy and really enforce that the due date of that sprint or that story is the due date of the sprint. So with that said, let's get into some logistics, right? So we're right at the halfway point. And so that first 30 minutes was all about infrastructure, data. How can I give you the right tools or the right techniques in Jira to really highlight data, right? And so what we're going to do next now is we're going to take all that, right? We're going to take those versions. We're going to take those components. We're going to take the epics, right? We're going to take all of that and we're going to put it in context with what we actually do as Scrum Masters, which is number one, we plan our sprint. So assuming, right, there's a lot of things that have to happen before you get to sprint planning, right? You need to refine your stories. You need to go get all that data that we were just talking about, right? But assuming you've taken care of all that, you're inside of Jira, and I'm gonna complete my sprint here. I'm just gonna move everything to the top of my backlog. I want to show you what a brand new clean sprint looks like. We're gonna hit cancel on this for now, right? But this is a backlog with 34 issues, right? And our job is to plan our next sprint. So in case you don't know, there's a create sprint button here. This is a permission-driven item though. If you can't create or start sprints, it's going to be because you don't have the right permission. And as a pro tip, I've seen this before, so if you're taking notes, write this one down. If you double check your permissions and you still can't start or create sprints, the problem is that your board filter is including way too many projects. And in one of those projects, you're not the administrator or the board. You don't have the permission to manage sprints. So Jira just takes it away. So always double check your board filter. Make sure that the scope is better defined, the projects in scope, and that you have the right permissions there. All right. So we have arrived. We're sprint planning. What do we do? Right? How do we use Jira? Well, I'm going to scroll down a little bit, right? And I want you to look at this backlog. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to make it easier on the eyes. Notice that my Jira probably looks a little bit different than yours. Okay. And I want you to look at this item right here. We're going to open this mobile 24, right? And one of the things that I want you to take a look at is the component, right? We're going to do iOS, right? The data is arbitrary. What data we have on there doesn't matter, right? But I want you to look at this particular story right here highlighted in blue. I want you to look at this. Notice that the component is visible. So I can take a look at a glance and go, oh, if my team wants to prioritize all iOS development, well, guess what? This is an iOS item and I can move it up in rank, right? I can go, wait, hold up. This is important. This is an iOS item and we want to work on iOS next, right? That's the goal, right? We're working on iOS. Android is taking a back seat. So anything with the component of Android doesn't need to be at the top of the backlog, right? And so this is how we can start influencing, again, this rank in the order of operations, right? So this is how we get iOS. Second, as we move our way across, you'll notice that we have this text here that says August Jira for Scrum Masters. Now this right here is our fixed version, right? So this is where you're going to determine, okay, should we work on something for August? Should we work on something for September? Or should we work on something for October? In other words, when you're looking at your stories and the fixed version is something that was in the past or something that's in the present or something that's way down the future, you can kind of imagine the sense of urgency, right? If you've fallen behind, you're probably going to want to work on things that you've fallen behind on first. Then you're going to want to work on things that are in immediately now due, like September. And then if you have time, right? If there's an abundance of time, then you'll work on something for far down in the future, right? And so this is where this fixed version right here tells us, right? It goes back to our timeline, right? We start seeing these vertical lines. And as we look at our stories and we look at the dates for our stories or the sprints at least, we can make a call. I'm like, okay, we're past due on this one. We haven't released August. So let's prioritize. Let's round everybody up and let's get anything that was slated for August. Let's get that out the door because we're 4 days late, right? And this is how you easily visualize it in Jira because any story that is slated for August, right? I'm just going to come in here and add some data, right? But any stories that are slated for August, they should be a top of your mind, right? They should be top of mind because you know that you're behind schedule, right? You know that you've fallen behind. And when you add those fixed versions, as I have them in here now, you will very easily see them. And so now you can balance, right? Okay. And you can say, okay, so we had this item that's for August. We have this component. This component here was, let's say it was also iOS. But then let's say we have a bug, and that bug, the component was for Android, right? And so now this is the beauty of having this data in Jira because now you can go, wait a minute, hold up. We have a bug, which is a red flag already, that is slated to be fixed in the August release, but it's a bug found in Android. And so again, when you're planning your sprint, you have a finite number of resources. And so you want to strategically plan your sprint to be as valuable or as impact driven as possible. And so when you're looking at your top 3 stories now, this should yell at you and go, wait, is this a bug we want to fix now because somebody put August as a fixed version? Or is it a bug we want to defer until later when we start working on Android things? And now this opens up a communication channel between you, your software leads, your product managers, right? Where you can now have a healthy debate and go, yeah, you know what? It is an Android bug, but it's a critical bug, right? Now this is where we can look at priority and go, wait, but it's a critical bug. And so we want it fixed in August. We don't want to wait, right? We don't want to wait until we start working on Android. It needs to go now. And now you have, again, a good and better understanding of that narrative so that you can go, okay, we'll leave it here. Because if the conversation was like, you know what, it's a bug, but it's just a typo, so it's a low bug, well, guess what? I don't want my team to invest calories in this. And in fact, I would then urge the team to go, okay, well, in that case, we're going to move it out to an October release or something like that, right? And we're just going to deprioritize it. So now this is where we can drop it down, we can right click on it, move it down to the bottom of the backlog, or we can just move it down a little bit down the list and not make it our top 10 or something like that, right? But again, this is where we can now have these healthy conversations and debates with our team, because otherwise you're just blindly picking things from your backlog. If the Scrum Master manages, so we have a question here. So if the Scrum Master manages multiple Scrum teams and shares dev team members across multiple Scrum teams, how can you see dev team members' workload across projects? So in sprint planning, you're not over assigning work to dev. So that's very tricky, because Jira by default is designed to be very singular team, right? Just one team is working out of this particular backlog and this particular project. So if you have your teams, if you have the same person working on multiple projects, that's usually not a good indicator, because that individual has to go to 3 or 4 more different places to figure out their workload. So it's not, my recommendation would be, you want to organize your work, specifically like your Jira projects, to be team driven, not product driven, right? Because if they're team driven, then your team organizes and centralizes to one Jira project, and all of their resources for that particular individual, their capacity, is just in one Jira project. Because when you're product driven or something else, or project driven, right, you run the risk of having your resources shared across. Now, Jira is not a traditional waterfall or just a traditional project management tool. So Jira doesn't know how each team member is being reallocated across different projects, right? So it's not a capability in Jira. Like, Jira will tell me in here, well, when I plan my sprint in a second, it will show me for this sprint and for this project the capacity of that individual. So my recommendation, if you really needed something that spans across projects, I would look at a plugin called Team Worklog Report Jira. I think it's this one. Let's see. I'll recognize the logo. Yeah, I think it's this one. Yeah. And so I would recommend you do something like this. And then the other thing that you got to do is you got to be very religious about switching from story points to time estimates, so that everybody has the right time estimate. And then in here, for this individual, because you can put people's names in your search here, then you can see that person and how many how many total hours they signed up for across all the different projects. Because again, you won't have a singular view here in Jira. It's just not designed for that. All right, so let's keep going here. So now that we have our data, right, so we can basically say, all right, these are the 2 stories we want to work for the sprint. All you got to do is drag and drop into your sprint, or you can right click and move into your sprint. Now, you'll notice that a lot of my stories already have estimates. This is where you have 2 options. You can either do the story points, which is what I have, or you can do time-based. I don't recommend time-based. It's a little bit more micromanagement, but it's really up to you and what you need to do there. Let's kind of keep going with the point that I'm trying to drive here, though, is as you're planning your sprint, right, as you're bringing things into your sprint, you want to make sure that at a minimum, before you hit the start sprint button, you want to make sure that all of your stories have story points on them. What the story points mean or represent is a little bit less relevant, but you want to make sure that you have story points or that original time estimate, because if you don't, things that help you track velocity and capacity of your team, and things that help you track like your burn down and the effectivity of your team, those don't work if these don't have values in them. So you want to make sure before you hit that start sprint button that you are actively putting in numbers here and having that appropriate number in here, right? Whatever that number may be, because if you don't, then Jira won't work effectively. So you want to make sure that that's there. The other thing that you want to make sure is that optionally, right? Optionally, you have assigned the workout. Now, Agile will tell you don't do that. Scrum will tell you don't do that. Jira and me will tell you to do it, because going back to Vanessa's point from earlier, if you want to see at least for this sprint and at least for this project, right? Which is why, again, I highly recommend your Jira projects are team driven, not project or product driven. Because if they're team driven, then you can click on these three little dots and you'll be able to see the breakdown. You will be able to see for each assignee how many issues they've taken on and how many story points are assigned to them. And now you can cross-reference this against your velocity chart, which is going to show you the last 5 or 7 sprints worth of historical data and tell you, hey, Alana's taking on too much work. She used to only do like 5 points and now we're doing 8. So that increases the probability that Alana might not meet her commitments. So we want to be very mindful of our each of our team members' capacity, in addition to the overall team capacity when we're planning our sprints, because that's the difference between setting up somebody for success or setting up someone for failure. All right, another question here. Can we use Jira to estimate user stories? Yes. So this is kind of what I was describing, right? So there's a little bubble here. You can put a number. And so I follow Fibonacci, which is 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. And you're able to put your point here and you can estimate it. And you do have 2 estimates. You can do a story point estimate, or you can go to your board settings and there's an estimation section and you can change it to original time estimate. That's what you would want to do. And if you do that, then it's going to work off of hours instead of story points. But Agile and Scrum calls for story points. Let's see. When do you try to engineer something in Jira versus buy a plugin? When the juice is not worth the squeeze, I guess. If you spend, like, if somebody has already solved the problem and it's cheap, I would just buy the plugin. But otherwise, automation rules are very effective. But now you got to know a little. Now you got to be a little bit more intimate with how Jira works fundamentally. All right. Vanessa says, for story points, is it a good idea to create a rule that when issues move from to do to in progress, that story points are required? Devs can forget to point their issues. So this, Vanessa, if you go down that route, right? If you wait to put the story points until after you started your sprint, then, like I said, your reports will break, right? Your burn down will not show effectively, and your velocity chart / that determines your capacity will not work either. So it's not a good practice for your story points to come later. You have to predict and anticipate the level of effort as you're planning your sprint. If you wait until you go to in progress, it's way too late for that. Like you're not gonna. Jira is not gonna work for you as effectively as possible because you started your sprint and you have nothing, and so Jira's playing catch up the rest of the time, and now the tool's working against you as opposed to with you. So I would not start my sprint without putting the story points in there at a minimum. The stories here, these things that are these statuses, those are less relevant. Expect to not always have everything in to do, because the harsh reality is that work will always carry over. I've probably worked on, I don't know, 600-700 sprints in my lifetime in my career, and I don't know that I've ever had a perfect sprint. So expect at least 20, maybe 30% of your sprint to carry over and roll over. So naturally, work is going to be in flight. And so expect the colors to be a little bit different. Atlassian didn't used to care. Atlassian didn't used to care about this part and would just roll up the story points as like down here, as you just see 15. I kind of like that more. I don't like that it breaks it up by status, but it is what it is. But take that with as you will. So now that we've planned our sprint, right? Now that we've kind of gone through the exercise of planning our sprints, we can now officially start our sprint. And this is where you can set dates, right? This is where you can rename it. This is where you can set your duration, right? If you set your duration, notice that it'll automatically, from today's start, it'll put 2 weeks out, and then you can hit start sprint. Okay. So now as Scrum Masters, this is where the fun starts, right? Because we just did the one thing that happens every 2 weeks, which is your sprint planning. But now we get to do our daily Scrum every single day. So how do we use Jira for our daily Scrum? So number one, the first thing I would do is I would go to your configure board. Come on, Jira. You were doing this to me yesterday. Why don't you like me? Standby, technical difficulties. Configure board. Yay. Okay. you go to your card layout and make sure that this days in column is turned on. The days in column is really powerful. What it does is it adds little dots. You see these dots right here? And it will tell you exactly how many days that particular story has been in that particular status. And as you can see, this mobile sync bug has been in here for 1,131 days. And to do, it probably means this is not that important of a story as we thought it would be. Maybe we shouldn't even work on it anymore. But when you're in one of these other statuses, it's very important because if something has been in this architecture review for 16 days, well, this now you as a scrum master, this becomes your to-do list, right? Because now your job is to go figure out why is this stuck in architecture. You talk to Alana, you talk to the architecture review board, and you're trying to figure out, are they out on vacation? Are they like our Congress that goes on recess every 15 minutes, right? Like you got to figure out what's going on. Like, why is this thing stuck? Our sprints are 14 work days. Sorry, our sprints are 14 business days, 10 work days. And so something being stuck in it for 16 days, it's a red flag, right? And so these little dots are going to give us that information to be able to follow up. Now notice when something moves to the next status, those three dots get cleared out because now the timer starts all over for when it entered the new status. So basically, if you see red dots, that means trouble because Jira is telling you something is getting delayed, something is not moving forward. And in Scrum, technically you have until the end of the sprint to get all the way across, but it would be foolish to wait until the day before to finish everything, right? And this is now where like our burn down comes into play, right? Because when you look at your report over here and you're looking at your burn down chart, um, Samuel says, can we report or use that field days and columns? No. So not natively in Jira. Again, unfortunately, now to answer when Ronnie was saying, when do you engineer versus when do you buy a plugin? This is one of those things that no matter how hard you try to engineer, Jira doesn't expose that data for you, at least natively, right? So there are ways to see it like through APIs and whatnot. That's a little bit more complex. Or you get an app like custom charts for Jira. And if you go into the Atlassian Marketplace, whoa, I'm clicking in way too many places, right? But if you go look in the Atlassian Marketplace and you put like time and status, then you're going to see that there's 192 different apps that basically will give you that data. So unfortunately for that specific functionality, viewing it on your board is the only thing you can view, or you go and buy one of these that will then help you visualize it better, like through a report or something like that. So again, this is where we differentiate between what do we buy versus what do we just architect. So anyway, so I was talking about this burn down chart, right? So as you can see here, my burn down chart doesn't say anything right now because I just started the sprint. But if I were to go back a sprint, we can look at this burn down chart here, right? And so the point I'm trying to make is, let me give you one other last piece of information before we get this far. When we're looking at our board, you will only, I repeat, you will only get credit when something moves to the farthest rightmost column. It doesn't need to be your done status. Make no mistake, it does not need to be your done status. But you will only get credit when an item makes it to the farthest most right column, whatever that column or status is. Then when you look at your reports and you're looking at your burn down, you can expect to see a dip, right? So if I move back to my sprint 3, you will see that I now have a dip because I just got credit because I moved an item from the left to the farthest most right column. And so earlier I was saying you want to be watching these little red dots, right? Because if they're stuck in a particular status, then you don't get credit, right? You don't get credit. So your burn down starts looking a lot like this, where it's flat. Because unless things make it to the right, Jira will not go down. And in fact, if you add things to your sprint, you'll see Jira go up. And you'll notice that there's a burn down chart. So this is not good behavior. You don't want spikes up. And so when we talk about Vanessa's thing from earlier, right? If we were to then require the story point, because this is driven off of story points, right? And your team goes, oh, I'm working on it now. Now I'm going to estimate it. Well, now you're going to get the spike. So your burn down is going to be completely inversed because every time that an item moves to in progress, and now your team's required to put the story points, your burn down is going to go up and up and up until they finish all the work, right? And so you're going to have like a pyramid or a triangle, right? And you're not going to want that because Jira sets the bar. Jira sets the starting point the moment you hit start sprint with whatever story points made it in there. So any altercations, right? Anytime that you add story points or remove story points, it's going to directly impact your report. And this report is important because this report is going to tell you if you're doing your job or not, right? This report is like the best tool that you have in your arsenal as a Scrum Master. Your job as a Scrum Master is to make this red line hug or be as close as possible to this gray line that Atlassian defines for us, right? And down below, it'll even tell us what's going on. If it says burn down, that's good. That means you finished something. If it says scope change, that's bad. That means you brought work into your sprint or you added story points after your sprint started. So scope changes are bad. Burn downs are really, really good. So yeah, so basically your job at this point though becomes very easy, right? So you're just making sure as a Scrum Master that your team every day during the daily scrums they're moving things from left all the way to the right. And a couple of things that you want to listen for as we start wrapping up here into the last few minutes of this training, right? A couple of things you want to be listening for is your team working on something that isn't in the sprint? Because that's really, really bad, right? That's really, really bad. And then going back to Vanessa's point from earlier, right? If your team is working across 3 or 4 different Jira projects or sprint boards, right? They also then need to go to 3 or 4 different stand-ups, which are now taking 15 minutes out of each one, which is now you lost an hour every day, right? Obviously, if you're going across 4. So it's not very effective for your team members to be in like so cross-pollinated like that, right? You really want to centralize your developers to be in one single place so they can status and update in one single place. And so just be listening, right? Be listening if they're working on some other thing, because another challenge of kind of having these cross domain developers is that they might be working on something that's not your priority. And so now you as your Scrum Master for your project, you're going to look bad because they're working on somebody else's priority. So another Scrum Master is going to look really good, but it's going to look really bad for you because your developer is working on somebody else's priority. And so this is, again, where you want to have them centralized under one Scrum Master or one sprint so that you're not playing this game of like hot potato with your developer. It's not good for anybody. Let's see. The other thing that you want to be listening for is status updates. My buddy here, Ronnie, the Jira guy, who's been helping me out, Ronnie, and you see him in the chat here, he's got a famous shirt that you can get through his marketplace that says, "Have you updated your Jira issue today?" Because believe it or not, even though it's the developer's job to update the Jira's tickets, it's the last thing that they do. And so since they don't update the Jira tickets, they start getting stale, right? So this is how you end up with a status of, or being an item being in the status of to do for 1,131 days, right? But the other thing that you want to consider is that your developers are going to say, "Oh yeah, I tested this thing, I pushed it into production, we're good to go," and this bug is still stuck in to do. They're not going to follow along. So this is where you want to get a little bit on their case and go, "Hey, if you're working on this, make sure you move it across the board," right? Because otherwise, Jira is only going to be as useful as the status updates that your team provides. Now, there are ways to, through some automation rules, to kind of allow them to kind of flow a little bit easier. You can make automation rules for when the branch is created, automatically move it to coding in progress. You can do a rule that says when they open up a PR, it moves it to like code review, right? When the PR merged, it can move to QA. So you can automatically do those transitions for you. And yeah, so the Jira guy says, "Have you uploaded your Jira issues today?" That is his famous tagline that made him very popular. So yeah, so this will be the constant struggle with you as a Scrum Master and your developers is that they don't update their statuses. So other than that, though, if you can get through all those things, I think just going back to the PowerPoint here. Yep. So we looked at swim lanes. Oh yeah. Okay. So yeah. So other than that, just it's a communication, and I've given you enough tools. Hopefully, this makes a little bit of a difference as a Scrum Master, right? Because again, just knowing how to use Jira is one thing, but using it with now this newfound knowledge might give you a slightly better edge. So since we've arrived here at the end, I just wanted to let you guys know, scan that QR code, follow me on LinkedIn, send me a request. We do all kinds of things on here, right? So we have the Jira Life every single Thursday where we live stream and we talk to members of the Awesome community. So if you're new to Jira and you're like, hey, how do I get more involved? The Jira Life is here. Another benefit is if you do have the ACP 120, 520, 420, 620, right, and you're looking to renew them, attending these sessions, these live learnings, and our regularly scheduled Jira Life episodes, you get credits, you get points for your renewal. So make sure you again scan that QR code so you can subscribe to this channel to get your credits. We do have memberships on the Jira Life. I have memberships outside. If you need like one-on-one help, there's some opportunities there for you through the members. So check that out. I'm gonna have some free courses. I have some paid courses. I have my merch store. I have a couple of other things available for you. So if you want to take those skills to the next level, check them all out. I am actively working on a much more in-depth version of this training. So if you're looking for something where I don't go as fast, but go a lot deeper into these certain topics, stay tuned. I do have a Jira for Scrum Masters course coming out really, really soon. I'm putting the finishing touches on that. So with that said, folks, I appreciate you being here, taking the time for being here. Hopefully you learned something. I hope to see you. I got 2 more live trainings in September. So we're going to one on Jira Advanced Roadmaps, and then we have one for Jira Administration. And then if you have any topics, let me know in the chat. We are looking for what we want to teach in October, November, December. I'm going to try to change it up every 3 months. And so if you want a specific topic or something that's of interest to you, let me know, and I'd be more than happy to add it here. And as Rodney always says, we didn't choose the Jira Life chose us. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you around.